is Margot Field and I work for GPSA, and I'm really delighted to bring a webinar called How to Teach Your Registrars About Managing Mental Health Conditions, Top Tips, particularly learning to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And we've got the fantastic Susan Barnett, who is a GP and a GP counsellor, and an ME who is the presenter. Susan has been more than 20 years a GP, and she commenced formal GP counselling in 2014 after obtaining her FPS2 certificate. She works as a GP in private practice in Melbourne, and she is on the general and educational committees for the Australian Society of Psychological Medicine, which you might find an interesting organisation to look up. She's passionate about educating other GPs to become more confident in supporting their patients who present with emotional issues. She's also a mum of three boys and 2 dogs, and she has a supportive husband. She loves walking and running. I'm pretty impressed with the running, and catching up with family and friends. So go you, Susan. Thank you for presenting tonight. So before we get any further, I would like to let you know that I'm not an Indigenous Australian. I was raised on the Gadigal land in Sydney, but now live in the Wurundjeri land in Victoria. I'd especially like to welcome and acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending tonight or listening in. GPSA acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we work and live and listen. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and we commit to working together in the spirit of mutual understanding and respect for the benefit of our whole community and future generations. Thank you.
Thank you everybody for coming tonight to hear about this topic, and I hope by the end of it I've been able to impart some really simple and practical strategies that you can use to teach your registrars and maybe even yourself some ways to manage mental health conditions more comfortably. In my role as a medical educator doing ECT visits, I've been doing that for about 4 years. It's really common where I see the registrars, and if a patient presents with a mental health condition, the registrars, even their body language, they tend to freeze a bit. And then when we debrief about it, they say, I don't know how to fix it, or I don't know what to say or do. Or they literally just focus on, I've got to get the DSM-5 diagnosis, do a mental health plan and send them off to the psychologist. And I actually believe that we as GPs, we can do this sort of stuff really well. It's, you know, mental health is patient-centered and we do that well. And in general practice, a lot of these mental health consults are very uncomfortable. And it's about learning how to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And the picture I've shown is that, you know, often patients do present highly distressed with a lot of energy. And there's some really simple skills that we can do and we can teach our registrars to do to move them from the scattered, panicked brain to a calmer brain by the end of the consult. I wanted to read this quote to you because it really stood out about the importance of we're not there to carry these patients, we're there to walk beside them. And so when someone is broken, don't try to fix them. You can't. When someone is hurting, don't attempt to take away their pain. You can't. Instead, love them by walking beside them in the hurt. You can. Because sometimes what people need is simply to know they aren't alone. And this quote really emphasized that being comfortable with uncomfortable. It's just saying, I'm here with you and I can help. And I'd really impart that for your registrars. It's not our role to actually fix them, especially in those first couple of visits. And that can actually be quite disempowering. And the interesting thing, I think as GPs, we're not really taught a lot about the psychodynamic principles that go on in a consult. And as GPs, we get transference and countertransference and projection. All these sort of things happen. And it's, of course, I think that's why a lot of people don't want to do mental health consults, because they are difficult and uncomfortable. But there are really simple strategies, which I'll go through tonight, that we can use and we can teach our registrars to make these consults actually quite fun. So today what I'm going to be discussing with you, and it's the things that I believe are important and that I'm often telling the registrars in ECTVs. So that's why I'm sort of bringing these things up tonight. One is the important and simple communication skills. That's so important for mental health consults. Some psychoeducation, simple strategies that you can use to teach your patient about how our brain works. Creating a simple but also useful mental health plan for you as a GP. Ensuring patient safety, utilising family and important supports, ensuring registrar self-care, and then towards the end, some useful and simple tools that I actually use a lot for common mental health presentations that I think any GP can do. I'll have a little bit of a chat about time management and also financially how to make it work. But with mental health consults, it really is about using relational medicine, creating a good therapeutic relationship between the doctor and the patient. And that's what I would urge you to teach your registrars. I'm a quote girl, as you probably see. This was a quote that I just wanted to bring up. So I remind my fellows, residents and medical students that what we do is a privilege. People let us into the most intimate aspects of their lives and they look to us to help guide them through very complex and delicate situations. And, you know, as a GP, we're privileged to do what we do, but we need to create a safe place. And for anyone who's familiar with Brené Brown and vulnerability, if you haven't seen that TED Talk, I'd urge you to do it. But when patients present with mental health conditions, they're going to reveal their most ultimate side. And we as GPs need to be aware that, is this a safe place? Am I making them feel safe and welcome? And so that again is another thing, just to talk to the registrars about how do you make your patient feel safe? And even for yourself as a supervisor, how do you make your patients feel safe and also your registrar feel safe? So with communication skills, these are the things that I think are so important. So validate, validate, validate. And I say that again and again because it makes a huge difference. So when I talk about validation, it really is patient comes in saying, oh my gosh, I'm really not coping. This is really difficult because I'm separating from my husband, all that sort of stuff. And just to listen and then to just go, oh, that sounds so hard. That's validation. You are acknowledging that you are listening to this person and that you can see that they're struggling, and sometimes even saying, if I was experiencing what you're experiencing, I would be struggling too. So saying it's okay to be struggling. Give them time to talk and listen actively. So really listening. And with that, that's really facing them, eye contact, not looking at the computer. Reflect back the key things you've heard. And I know a lot of what I'm saying is really simple communication skills, but I think going through that with your registrar, especially for mental health conditions, is really important. Being non-judgmental, and sometimes that can be hard because we might hear things that there is a bit of judgment popping up in our head, but it's really important if we want our patients to feel safe that we make them feel not judged. And also, of course, discuss confidentiality. As I mentioned before, make good eye contact. And when we do eye-to-eye contact, it actually gets the neurons in our brains wiring and firing together, and it activates our safe system, our soothing system, releases oxytocin. So there's neurophysiology going on there. And I'd like to tell the registrars that it actually, that simple act of really looking at the patient can actually make a big difference. Leaning in, using a soft, gentle tone of voice makes them feel safe. And allow crying. I have lots of tissues in my tissue boxes in my room, and sometimes people will say, oh, I'm so sorry for crying. And I go, no, crying's allowed in this room. That's again saying it's safe to be here. It's safe to show your vulnerable side. Remind them that they're safe with you. Even that statement, I'm here for you, you're safe. That can go a long way to a patient who's feeling really distressed, and it can calm them down. And don't try to problem solve. That might come later, but initially it's literally about just saying, I'm here for you, I'm supporting you, and that's the walking beside them. And big one, congratulate your patients who present asking for help, because it really takes courage to come in and say, I'm not coping. And So that's a big one that I would be teaching the registrars. So I imagine a lot of you are already doing this, but I think these are the key things that if we do this, that can make a mental health consult really go well. And often I will write in my, when I've been with a patient, that I've done supportive counselling, and I used to think I'm not really doing much, but it actually does make a big difference, and it really helps patients. And they'll come back is the other thing. So psychoeducation, education is one of a general practitioner's strength, and I believe psychoeducation about how the brain works is actually really important. And I picked this image because it's explaining all the neurotransmitters and how our brain is linked to our body. We're not separate. That's too complicated. But I want to show you a very simple strategy that I use for almost every single patient to explain how their brain works. And a lot of this too is about normalizing that difficult emotions, they're actually normal. They're there to protect us, to help us deal with the difficulties of life. And I'm big about not pathologizing mental health conditions and actually normalizing how people experience their emotions. So I've brought up the videos and the links are there. Due to time, I'm not going to show you the videos, but I just wanted to give you the picture so you know what you're looking for. But I'm going to demonstrate to you the Handa's brain model. Now, Dr. Dan Siegel's an American adolescent psychiatrist, but he's also done significant research, written lots of books about the neuroscience of the brain. And he's explained this model called the Handa's brain. So I'll show you how I use it for my patients. And if you're able to show this to your registrar, or the registrar, if they're not comfortable to do it themselves, get this video. It goes for a couple of minutes and get it to show the patient. So hopefully you can see my wrist, the light's shining in it. So what I say to my patients, I just want to explain to you about how the brain works. Your forearm represents your brain stem. This is a part of your brain that keeps you alive. It keeps your heart beating and your lungs breathing, but there's no thinking or feeling going on in this part of the brain. Your thumb is actually your emotional brain, and it's your old primitive brain. And its role is to keep you alive at all costs. So it's constantly scanning the environment and determining, am I safe? And if it detects threat, it fires off. So if we think about a caveman, a saber-toothed tiger's coming towards it, it's got three choices. It can fight. If it's taken it on before, it will. It will go in and it will get angry and it will fight this tiger. If it's never done that before, or it knows there's a cave really close and it can run, it will flight, it will run away and it will hide. And that's often anxiety and avoidance. If it can't do either, it pretends it's dead. That's the freeze response. And the reason for that from an evolutionary point of view is that predators generally don't like to eat dead species, so it plays dead. Now, I explain that to my patients. So when you feel anxious, you're wanting to flight. When you feel angry, you're wanting to fight. When you freeze and you're numb, that's your emotional brain going, I just don't have any options here. What happens when your emotional brain's running in the show? It fires off cortisol and adrenaline. It gets your sympathetic nervous system running. It makes your heart beat faster. You breathe faster. Your muscles tense up. Your vision gets narrower. Your thinking gets narrower because all you want to do is get out of here to deal with this threat. Now, the problem with our emotional brain is it doesn't know the difference between a real threat, saber-toothed tiger coming towards you, or a perceived threat. And in our modern day, most of our threats are actually perceived. So then what I explain to my patients is with therapy, what we teach you is to bring your wise, compassionate thinking mind online. And this is a part of the brain that's actually able to say, hey, there's not a saber-toothed tiger here. This is my mind creating this threat. And by doing this, what I often say when people get angry, so you flipped your lid and emotional brain ran the show. When people have a panic attack, so you flipped your lid and the emotional brain ran the show. Let me teach you how to bring yourself back. And this is such a powerful tool to use for your patients. And certainly because I do counseling, I use that again and again. but I believe that GPs can even teach it, and it just gives people an understanding of how our brain works. And it's not our fault that we get angry. It's not our fault that we get anxious, but we can learn how to manage it in a more healthier behavioral way. Another YouTube is, just do this, Dr. Russ Harris. And if anyone's heard of Russ Harris, he was actually a GP, a fellow GP. And he went off and he's written books on acceptance and commitment therapy. But he's created heaps of YouTube videos that explain different concepts for emotional issues. And if anybody's interested in going further, like I learned my first therapy through Russ Harris. I did every online course and he taught me about validation and all that sort of stuff. But this, you know, the caveman mind, you can have a look, I'll get your registrar to have a look, is a really simple presentation to explain to your patients. So I'll often have my phone on me and I show them the YouTube video that I think is best for the patient to understand some of these key concepts about how our mind works and why we do what we do. And I've left these links at the end if anybody wants to look at them. Then another one is, and I'm sure most of you may have seen this, is I Had a Black Dog Named Depression. This is a brilliant YouTube video to show patients who present with depression, and it actually takes you through how they feel, how they behave, what makes their depression worse, and then comes out at the other end saying, this is what you need to do. These are the strategies that will help you to actually recover from this illness. And again, it says it so beautifully that it means we can sit back and just let the patient watch and then talk to them about it. So again, especially for registrars who are still learning this can be a good tool that they pull out, that they let the patient watch. And while the patient's watching, that can be when they're having a little bit of a breath and go, okay, let me just, what am I going to do? How am I going to manage this consult? And there's also one from that on how support people can help people suffering from depression. So I'm now going to move on to a mental health plan. And I'm not going to tell you how to do a mental health plan because we all know how to do them, but some things that I think is really key is that a good mental health plan can actually be really useful for you as a GP to get to know your patient really well. And the GPMHSC have actually updated the mental health plan template, and it's called Wellbeing. It's a patient wellbeing plan, recovery plan. So they've actually really moved with the times where we are going in mental health, and it's got a real recovery focus. So I'm a big believer that when you do a mental health plan, use that time to really get to know your patient and to understand what has brought them here today. Why are they sitting here in tears? What's going on in their life? Because generally there's lots of different things. I recommend the DAS-21, and I would get your registrars, if they don't know that, to have a look at it. It takes a bit longer, but what's good about it is it separates the patient's diagnosis from depression, anxiety, or stress. So it then gives the registrar a bit more confidence, especially if they're saying the diagnosis for a mental health plan that they're suffering from anxiety or it's mixed depression, anxiety. The one thing I would say about the DAS-21 though, it does tend to overscore. So I have many patients who are extremely severe depression and they're not. It's just that that's their subjective level, but it's also a really good tool to, if you end up putting them on medication or through therapy, you repeat it and it really does respond. Like you see a significant jump when somebody's responding to their psychological therapy or medication, and it's good to show the patient, look how well you've improved. The mental state examinations, I used to get really stressed about that because I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm doing it right. We're not psychiatrists. We're not looking for an excellent MSc, but just keep it simple and relevant. Just state the issue, what you observe with this patient, just for, so you've got it documented. I'm going to introduce a concept that was actually introduced to me through the ASPM, one of the members there, about using a HEADS assessment as a guide when you take a mental health history and not just for the adolescents. And I'll go through that in the next slide. Also, just to inquire, read their upbringing. You'll often be surprised. And there was a webinar, I think a couple of months ago, on adverse childhood experiences and how they are linked with people developing mental health conditions when they grow up. And that you'll be surprised at how, you know, really well-functioning people, and then you suddenly discover that there was significant trauma when they were growing up, or they lost a young brother or things like that. And that will, you know, it's not uncommon people present with unresolved trauma, and that's why they're presenting now. And list the problems with the patient's input. So I'm not a believer of saying the DSM-5. You'll hear me say that a few times. It's more about what is the patient struggling with? So ask them or reflect back. So this is what I think your main issues are. And then that way the patient feels heard, but it also really helps you to move into setting some small, simple, achievable and realistic goals, even at the beginning, the first consult that you see them. And when we're setting goals, I love this statement and I use it a lot. Often what happens is patients come in and they say, right, I'm going to do this. If we use weight loss, for example, I know that's not mental health. Well, it is, got a mental health component. But it's like, right, I'm going to lose 15 kilos in 8 weeks and I'm going to do it. And this is what I'm going to do, but they don't really plan it, or they're too busy to actually do the things that need done. And then they don't achieve the goal, and then they feel bad, and then they end up overeating, and it's that vicious circle. So I really, and this is something I think you can get the registrars to do, set a small goal, but make it a big priority. So make it a goal they know they're going to be able to do. So sometimes it might even be just walk around the block, or even simpler, walk for 5 minutes and then come back. And then I want to see you next week and we're going to review it from there. Because if people feel like they're succeeding, what you do there is you empower them and you're more likely to get them to return. So with the heads, I just think it's a good one so you don't miss anything. So H stands for home and environment, and really finding out about what's going on at home. Because often you'll find out that a person's relationship's not going well, or they've got a sick mother at home, or you know, they're just really, really busy and they've got 3 children and one's got learning issues and they're struggling with that, or is being bullied. So, you know, really go into what is happening for this patient at the moment. And it can actually really put an understanding of why this patient's not coping. E for our adolescents is education. What year level are they in at school, and how are they going at school? Are they struggling? Are they being bullied? That sort of stuff. But the same goes for our adults about their employment status. How is work? And workplace bullying, unfortunately, is becoming more and more common. So asking about it can once again give you more context for why this patient's struggling. Activities that they do and enjoy, because one of the things we do, especially for depression management, is get them to do pleasurable activities. And if you find out what they enjoy, you can then bring that in towards the end for your goal setting. But also exercise. Exercise is just as good as antidepressants for improving our mood. So we really want to be encouraging all our patients to do exercise. D stands for drugs, including alcohol. It's interesting that we say drugs and alcohol when alcohol is actually a drug, but inquiring about that, and also diet. So we now know that your gut is your second brain. Your gut and brain are actually very closely communicating, and people who've got a poor diet, that alone can be impacting their mood. So as GPs, we give advice about diet, and it can actually be a really important turnaround for patients who are not coping emotionally. S, I've got 2 S's because there's so many S's, but you know, obviously inquiring about suicide and self-harm. Looking for supports, and there's another slide I'll talk later about the importance of supports and utilising them. Sleep, so important. If our sleep's not good, our mood's most likely going to be really impacted as well. And that might be one of the first things you deal with if somebody's not been sleeping because they're acutely stressed. Let's get your sleep sorted out. That's one problem, one goal. You can help them with that, then you get them back and you follow up. And the patient walks away feeling, thank goodness this doctor's hears me, they see me, and they're going to help me. Spirituality, that's important. And then S standing for sexuality, intimate relationships, and just, you know, being aware of that and obviously asking those questions, because they can certainly also impact their mood. But it's a really good way to make sure you're not missing anything. And certainly it was a new concept for me when I heard about it. Often people worry about, well, what if they don't qualify for the mental health plan? And I actually found it really hard to find this list, but this list is using the IC-10 rather than the DSM-5. And what I like about it, it's a bit more general. So, you know, sleep disorder or anxiety disorder. But, you know, I've underlined the ones that I use a lot, and I certainly would commonly write a reactive anxiety disorder or a reactive depression, because normally they're presenting acutely anxious due to external things. And you can argue, we can have that discussion later about whether that qualifies or not, but I believe that, you know, what we're doing here is we're preventing these patients, by giving them early help, we're preventing them from actually becoming more unwell, that they will actually develop a fully blown anxiety disorder. So I just giving that to your registrars though, talking to them about some common diagnoses that you can do, and they don't need to get it exact. I remember I used to worry about getting it exact, and we don't. I'd like to introduce to you, just for those who have not heard about this, the Chime Framework. And this is all about a recovery focused, and this is where we're moving to with mental health. And the reason I wanted to show it to you is to really reinforce that we as GPs can do a lot of this. And it's also about empowering our patients to be intimately involved in their recovery process, because there can be a problem when we get them into a mental health system and they get a diagnosis and they get labelled with this and it's not working, and they really develop this sense of helplessness and they feel disempowered. So the Chime Framework is all about empowering your patient. Connectedness, I spoke to you earlier about the importance of eye-to-eye contact, so important, and COVID's really taught us that as well, that isolation from important others really does impact our mental health. And it, you know, if you have a patient who really doesn't have anyone or hardly any supports, you may be it for a while. And if they're comfortable to come to you, I'd say go for it. Be there, but bit by bit, you want to build more people into their team. So getting them connecting to others is really important. Having hope and optimism. And often, you know, sometimes it can be really just so pessimistic, the sort of once you get into that mental health sort of cycle. But I think as GPs, we actually are really good at being optimistic and providing hope for our patients. And I'd encourage you all to urge your registrars to keep hope as well. Helping patients develop their identity. And one of the reasons that I go into more detail when I'm taking a mental health plan is that you actually find out about this individual sitting in front of you. You get the patient's narrative. Who is this person? They're more than just a diagnosis. And I think as GPs, we follow people through the years. We know their family. We've got this real, what's the word? Gosh, I'm losing my words. It's a bit of a gift that we can actually follow these patients, and we will be looking after them for years to come and get to know their family. So really getting to know who is this person is really important, and helping them find that too. The meaning is about understanding what it means to them that they've presented to you, and what, you know, even things like going and seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist. Some people have a lot of stigma and just don't want to do that, but they're happy to see their GP. So just being aware of that. And empowerment, I say that again and again, you know, we're there to walk beside them, not to carry them. And when I go through some of the things I talk about in a minute, hopefully that will help you all to go, okay, I can do this. I can help teach my registrars and even myself to empower my patients more. So create a team that are cohesive and have a clear role. Now, when I was in the hospital system, I did a couple of geriatric units, and one of the big things about doing geriatrics was you'd have family meetings and you'd meet people, and they were so helpful. And this is what I do for my patients with mental health issues, and it makes a difference. So if you've got, you know who the patient's seeing as a psychologist, and often we refer to the 3 or 4 psychologists that we use a lot. I'd really urge you to get the registrars to maybe pick up the phone or work out a way that you can communicate. I often email, make sure, and I don't use identifying names just so that it's encrypted, and I just let the psychologist know what's going on, especially for my patients with eating disorders, and it really makes a difference, because then I'm not alone. I know that I've got this team behind me. Liaising with the psychiatrist, or if they've got a dietitian or a physio or exercise physiologist. And also, if the patient allows, I have had times where I've actually contacted employers, if they're a supportive employer, And it can actually help for you to be advocating on behalf of the patient to say, look, they're really struggling. This is what would really help them during this difficult time, and they're going to get better. That you need to choose who you do that, but just don't forget to think about creating that team. Utilizing family supports, and I constantly get surprised at how. And I don't want to have a bit of a rant, but our mental health system, once a patient's over 17, parents are left out of the loop link, unless the individual actively asks for it. I do my best to involve family and friends. Now, obviously, I need consent from the patient, but I actually spend time letting my patient know why I think it would be really important to have their family or close friends supports involved. Because we can't give them 24/7 support. But when they leave our office, they're going home to an environment where there are people around who can help us make sure they're safe. And part of that then, though, involves educating the family and supports. And it really goes a long way. And look, this comes from my work with patients with eating disorders. Educating the family members about what an eating disorder is, and it's an illness, and it's not the patient being difficult, it's what this illness does, and giving them strategies on how to help their loved one during a difficult, like a meal time. And it just makes it so much easier, and it really, again, empowers the patient and empowers the family. And my personal experience is I've often avoided sending my patients to emergency departments. So if I've got someone who, especially patients who suffer from borderline personality disorder and they're chronically suicidal, sending them to a hospital is actually very traumatic for a lot of our patients. But if I know mum is really reliable and my patient consents, and I call mum and I say, look, we're really worried. I'd like you to come in and you need to take them home. And I want you to lock the tablets up, whatever, the concerns are. But if you're worried, here's the CAT team. And more often than not, we get the patient through the night. I see them the next day, crisis has been managed. Because suicidality is a bit like this, goes up and down, and we just need to contain them. And I know with some of the registrars that I've spoken to, they often go, I've just got to send them, I've got to call CAT, send them into emergency, which I think is being safe. I have nothing against that. But I just want to, get your registrar to think a little bit outside the square about, okay, can I bring the family in and involve them? I also use this a lot, and this is my sort of, for my clients when I'm trying to work out, okay, who's on your team? And remember, we want to let them know they're not alone. And that sense of I am not alone really does empower the patient to go, okay, I don't need to do this myself. And I would write the patient's name and I would say, okay, let's look at who's on your team. And so for this patient, Tracy, she's identified myself and the psychologist, but she's also got 4 important others who are involved in her team. Now, from there also, it might be that you say, okay, so my role as your GP, if we think of a patient with an eating disorder, is to manage your physical health. The psychologist is going to teach you strategies to overcome the eating disorder thinking. But what can mum do? What does mum do well? What does your best friend do well? Oh, Sally's actually really good at just distracting me. Okay, so you're writing that down. It doesn't take long. You give it to them and they walk out and they feel they're not alone and they feel more empowered. So again, it's a simple thing a registrar can do and it goes a long way. Just want to talk about safety issues for the patients. And a lot of the registrars often say to me, but what if they, they say they're suicidal and what do I do? And I need to send them to CAT. So I often just go through really key things about suicidality is, do they have a plan? If I ask someone if they have a plan and they say they don't, I kind of breathe a sigh of relief. Most of them are going to tell you they do have a plan. But if they have, then we go previous suicide attempts, how long, really go into detail about it. And if they say they're taking tablets, that's where I would bring the important other with the patients. In these cases, if they're acutely suicidal, you can actually break confidentiality, but we do it in a caring, loving way. But I would actually say, look, I need to let mum know about what's going on, and I'm worried about you, so I'm going to get mum to lock the tablets up. So we involve the family members, and again, that's actually something that can keep the patient safe, and we follow them up the next day. Also, for those of you who may not know, in showing the registrars, I know Beyond Blue have this, but there's many online where you can actually create a safety plan with your patient. And that actually asks questions. When do you know that you're not coping? What can you do? What can you listen to? Who can you call? And you type it out with the patient, you print it out and you give it to the patient, and you have things such as the CAT number there for them to contact. So it's really doesn't take long, but it's a really good thing for the patient to have. As I said earlier, important to include an important other. I also think it's important to have a discussion with the registrar about what qualifies for an assessment order and how to do this, because if you've never done one and then suddenly you've got a patient that you are like, I cannot let this patient go home, I don't have anyone to contact, what do I do now? It's really stressful, and I've been through that a few times. So letting your registrar know where is how do you find the assessment order, what qualifies for an assessment order, and what do we do? And I've certainly had times where I've had to cancel my afternoon because I'm with a very distressed patient who's acutely suicidal, and I'm waiting for an ambulance, and then I'm waiting for the police, and it's my whole day's gone. But that happens, not often, thankfully, but letting your registrars know about that. Also, if then concerned, though, call the CAT or Centre ED. That's always, the fail-proof method. And talking to your registrar about the difference between self-harm and suicidality, because they are different. Often self-harm is about distress tolerance. They're feeling intense emotions, and when they cause physical pain, that's actually better than the emotional pain. So people often have, reasons for doing self-harm, whereas suicidality is very different. So actually talking to your registrar about those differences is important, because they might get confused, especially for the early registrars. Then safety issues for yourself. And really important to have clear boundaries, and talking to your registrar about what do you think is okay and what's not okay. And I just did some teaching with some GPT-1s today, and we were showing them the Brené Brown. She's done a YouTube, I love Brené Brown, by the way, on boundary setting. And that's what she was saying, the most compassionate people actually have really good boundaries. And important that registrars know, what is my role for this patient? And your role is certainly not to carry them, but to walk beside them. And in my earlier years, I've learned the hard way. I probably wanted to carry them, and I tried to carry them, and you just get burnt out. And you've got to really be able to say, hey, you can help them, but it's not your role to save them. So working out, and having a team can really make a difference. And a quote that I once heard from a wise psychologist was, if you're working harder in their recovery than they are, then really you're carrying them. So even just that statement and getting the registrars to check in, I seem to be doing all this work for this patient and they're just not taking it. What am I going to do? Because often we as doctors, type A personality, blame ourselves, when actually it might just be that patient's not at that point of their recovery. So having a team of others, that's where I really recommended create a team around you, makes a huge difference, because then you as the treating doctor are not alone and you're not carrying it all. And I'm a big believer of getting supervision. And it's interesting that we as GPs, we don't have to get supervision for these sort of difficult consults. Speaking to psychologists, psychiatrists, that's part of their regular routine. And as part of ASPM, I'm certainly, we offer that sort of service. And it is so, you just learn so much by, presenting a patient and really trying to work out what's showing up in you. And you can really grow as a doctor by analysing these sort of difficult consults. So, ideally getting supervision through people who work with mental health patients a lot, but even just speaking to your supervisor or other doctors can make a difference. Making it financially viable. Watch this space. I wish I had a, really wise thing to say, but unfortunately our current Medicare billing does not reflect the complexity of this work. But I will often bill a 36 and a 44, and I've heard even from the registrars I'm teaching at the moment, they're terrified of being audited if they bill 144. And I then, explain to them about the PSR system and that if it's complex, if it's appropriate, it's okay to bill a 44. And we can probably have that discussion at the end because we might have different views on that. But I bill lots of 44s, lots of 36s, and my notes reflect what I'm doing. And I'm actually saving the government money because I'm doing what otherwise a psychiatrist would need to do, or sending them to the emergency department. So I really feel giving the time is, I don't have any issue with that. Another thing is letting your registrar know that you can stack a 23 with the 2713. So if a patient presents with a GP issue and then there becomes a mental health issue, you can add a 2713 onto that. Also utilising the billing. So obviously the mental health plan and mental health plan reviews, but for a lot of people with chronic mental health issues, they would qualify for a GPMP or a team care arrangement. But also if you're creating the team approach, use a case conference. I will often run case conferences with the psychologist and the psychiatrist if they're willing, and there are item numbers for that. Explaining to the patient about the safety net, especially if they're going to see a psychologist and they're a bit worried about the cost, because for a lot of people, especially if they're under the care of a psychiatrist and a psychologist, I'm thinking eating disorders patients here, gets very expensive. But for these patients, often they reach the safety net quite quickly, and then their out-of-pocket cost is very minimal. So just to reassure them, because we want to get them well and we don't want costs to get in the way, and often the public system's too stretched to give them that. And if you do an FPS2 course, the item numbers are actually patient gets a better rebate. So, and I always bill a gap, but that's, but you know, that I feel that you can make it viable, but we can have a chat about that at the end. Time management. So I'm not the best person to talk about good time management because I do like to give time. And so I'm not one that it would be very hard for me to do a mental health consult in less than 20 minutes, but I know some people can do it, and some experienced doctors can do it well, and I'd love to hear from you if you're in this audience to share that with you. But I would really urge the registrars to not be afraid to see the patient regularly and book in 30, 45 minutes, you know, build rapport, get to know the patient. And, you know, when one of the things I've said there, similar to wound management, like if you think of somebody who's got a leg ulcer, we will get them back sometimes 2-3 times a week, maybe more. We see them, we bill them, and we have no qualm. We just don't doubt that this is not needed. For mental health problems, when patients present very in crisis mode, if they know they're going to see you tomorrow, they'll get through the day. If they know they're going to see you in a couple more days or the next week, that gives them something to hold on to, and it actually calms them down. So I would be urging your registrars to get them back often. And also with the mental health plan, to take away the pressure of doing it on the first presentation. So first one, get to know them, find out what's wrong. I'd really like to get you back tomorrow so we can do a mental health plan. And I generally spend 45 minutes on my mental health plan. So, and you can bill for that. There's a 2717, which is for doing a long mental health plan over 40 minutes. So letting the registrars know about that. And it just takes the pressure off them so they can really just take more time to get to know the patient. A wise GP counsellor though, Dr. Kathy Adrin, has actually told me about how she can do a short consult. And, you know, in a 20-minute consult, one of the things she would do is let the patient talk for about 8 minutes, do really active listening, reflect back what you've heard, the issues, and then give them one suggestion, which I'm about to go into, about what they can do, and then book them back to see you. And that in itself can make a huge difference. And just the action of letting them know you're there for them, that there is hope, makes a huge difference, and the patients will feel a lot more safer. And that image I showed you right at the beginning, that scrambled brain to that calmer brain, it does happen with those basic skills. So I'm now going to introduce to you all some simple strategies that I use a lot with patients, and I'm hoping to share it with you all too. That can be used in a consult. So I'll go through them. So one is the Healthy Mind Plateau. Then there's the 3-2-1 exercise, which is a mindfulness exercise that can be done very quickly. Then there is slow rhythm breathing, and then activity scheduling. And then a little quote on healthy, happy family needed. Oxygen mask first, and then for eating disorders, separating the illness from the person. So the healthy mind platter. So this is another one from Dan Siegel, my hand as brain man. And what I use this a lot in COVID for my clients to say, okay, this is how we're going to keep your mind healthy during COVID. Now, this is evidence-based, neuroscience-based, that if people do these 7 activities every single day, they actually optimize brain function and help have a healthy emotional well-being. And I'll go through them all. Now, the thing is, how long do you do of each activity? They've never stated that. I would say just as long as you're doing it, that can make a difference. And what it's doing is it's stimulating the different parts of the brain. So we all know sleep is super important. And if a patient presents highly stressed and they're not sleeping, just getting that fixed can make a big difference, and they'll come back the next day feeling a bit better. And I do give temazepam for 3 or 4 days for my patients. If it means them getting a good sleep, I believe the benefit of that good sleep outweighs the risk of giving them some sleeping tablets, or I'll use melatonin, but it's a very short-term solution. Physical time. Exercise is just as good as an antidepressant. So I will always let patients know this, and I would always encourage them to get out and move their body. And even in COVID, it was like, what are you going to do in the house to keep yourself physically active? Focus time is doing an activity that gets you thinking. And, in COVID, we had 2 extremes. We had people who were working super hard, like ourselves. I'm sure most of you were all working harder. Then we had people who had nothing to do. So we had to get creative about what can you do to stimulate your brain so you challenge it. And it might be Sudoku. It might be doing a challenging recipe, or doing a jigsaw puzzle. So just giving them something that's going to stimulate the thinking brain. Connecting time. I've mentioned this a few times, but the importance of eye-to-eye contact, human connection. We humans are social beings. We need others. And being able to connect with others is super important. And that can be hard when patients live alone and don't have a lot of support. So as I said earlier, sometimes you, the GP, are their support, and that in itself can help them start to move forward. I did have a patient ask me in COVID who lived alone, saying, if I look into my dog's eye, does that count for connecting time? And I said, definitely, because pets are beautiful therapy for humans. Playtime is having a laugh. And I'd like you all just in this moment to smile. And when you smile, do you notice that little twinkle in your eye as you raise? Just that simple action is actually releasing a little bit of oxytocin, feel-good hormone. So there's good neurochemistry, stuff going on in our brain there. So making sure we all have a laugh. And sometimes, certainly I know in my work, I'm too serious and I need to really go, what am I going to do that's just going to make me have a laugh? And because it's really important to stimulate that part of your brain. Downtime, absolutely fine to veg out, to watch Netflix, to play computer games, but it's all about balance. And once again, during COVID, people were doing a lot of downtime, not much else. So I really encouraged them to do all of those 7 things every day, and it gave them something to follow. Time in refers to mindfulness. And a lot of people struggle with mindfulness and they say, oh, it doesn't really help, why do it? But I bring them back to the hand as brain. And when our emotional brain's running the show, we're not being mindful. By being mindful, we bring ourselves back into the here and now. And so I really use that as a way of explaining to my patients why mindfulness can be really good. They don't need to be doing 40 minutes a day, even just doing some informal mindfulness, which I'm about to show you with the next exercise. So I'd highly recommend using that for a lot of patients and giving it to your registrar to teach them. The 3-2-1 exercise is, and I'll do this with you all. So it's just about when a patient is flipped their lid and they're an emotional brain, what this exercise does is brings them back into the room. So I'd like you all to look around and notice 3 things you can see. And then to notice 2 things you can hear. And then to notice your right big toe and move it up and down, and just notice what that feels like. Now that took, not even 30 seconds. And when I do that with a patient, I then say to them, what did you notice by doing that? And they look at me going, well, just noticing things. I said, but how are you feeling now? Because often they're really physically agitated. Oh, I feel a bit calmer. And it's a perfect opportunity to say, that's because we brought you back. And that's all you need to do when you're really struggling, is just look around the room, play a bit of I Spy, and it helps bring you back. Because you can't go looking for things if you're an emotional brain. Slow rhythm breathing, I won't demonstrate that due to time, but slow rhythm breathing, again, it's similar to mindfulness, but when we're in our emotional brain, we're breathing fast. Our muscles are tense, our heart's racing. When we actually slow our breathing, in for 4, out for 4, in for 4, out for 4, we move into our parasympathetic nervous system. We actually calm ourselves down. So something as simple as breathe in for 4, out for 4 can make a huge difference for our patients, and they can do it anywhere. And so teaching this can be a really powerful tool, and it can take, you do it for 30 seconds. It's not a long exercise, and letting your patients know, but by linking it with the neurophysiology, the neuroscience, that they're more likely to do it and believe it. And you've got lots of apps and YouTubes that actually do slow rhythm breathing. For depression, one of the things about people when they're depressed is they just withdraw inwards. They don't want to see people. They don't want to do anything. So I will often get an activity schedule. This is not for the first consult. This is one of these consults you can bring the patient back, but it's a really easy exercise to do. And I find out about what my patient's week looks like. And it's really interesting when you can get two extremes. So I've got, the lonely, isolated woman who's got no contacts. You draw her week and you go, wow, you haven't got much on. You're not contacting anyone. And a picture tells 1,000 words. And you can see their sleep. You can see whether they're exercising. You can see what they're doing for pleasure. So you're going through even like the Healthy Mind platter, some of the things they do. And then you can use that to say to your patient, okay, I want you to do this one thing, and you give them that. You draw it down and you say, I want you to start walking every day. When's a good time? Let's just do it for 5 minutes. Other extreme is a really stressed parent who's got no time. And she's kind of gone, I don't know why I'm stressed. I don't know why I'm coping. I should be coping. Then you draw their weekly activity and you go, wow, how do you do that? So again, you're letting them know that, this is not sustainable, and you can then use that as a guide to actually help them create change. And it's not that hard, this sort of thing, and it's actually really enjoyable. And once again, you get to know what your patients like, what their day-to-day life is like. This was one I learned from a family therapist early on, and I use it again and again when I have the young parents come to me and they're absolutely exhausted and they're not coping. And I say, look, the guide to a healthy, happy family needs that mum has time for herself. Dad has time for himself. Mum has time with the children. Dad has time with the children. Mum and dad have time with the children as a family. And mum and dad have time together. Sorry about the light. And often what's missing is mum is not having time for herself, and dad may not be having time with himself. And also mum and dad not having time together. So being able to explain that and go, okay, so how can we get you to have time for yourself? Or how can we get you and your hubby to have time for yourself? Because it's actually really, really important to keep everything going. Obviously, with younger children, it's going to be a lot less frequent compared to when children are older, and you can leave the children at home and things, the teenagers at home. But it's just such a simple tool, and I use it a lot. The oxygen mask first sort of follows on similarly, where it's using a metaphor about when someone comes in, and it's often, I use these for the carers, for the people who are give. So they've got elderly parents and, oh, doctor, I just can't have time for myself. I haven't got time to look after myself. I'm just too busy. Or the mother who feels guilty if she goes and has a weekend away with girlfriends because she's leaving the children. And I say, okay, I want you to imagine you're in a plane and the oxygen's going down. And you've got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and the oxygen masks fall. Who will you put on? Who will you put the masks on first? Now, the majority of my clients go, well, my children, of course. Some people know they've got to put it on themselves. But I say, okay, so you put it on your children. You put your oxygen mask on your 2-year-old, then you go to your 5-year-old. And just as you're putting it on your 5-year-old, you notice that the 2-year-old's taken it off. So then you need to go and do that. Plane is still going down. Oxygen levels are dropping. What's going to happen? And they go, I'm going to drop. And if you drop, what's going to happen to the 2 and the 5-year-old? They're going to drop too. Yeah. And it's a real aha moment for the carer or the parent to say, I need to look after myself, don't I? And so those little things, it's about giving them permission to look after themselves so they can look after others. I look after a lot of patients with eating disorders, and I tried to find the picture I use, and this was the closest one I could get. But I really like to explain to my patient, but also the parents, that when people are suffering from an eating disorder, the illness, it's like a parasite. It gets in and it takes over your loved one. And it literally, it's nasty, it's demanding. It starts off by, making the individual feel like they're doing the right thing and they're being healthy and it's all going to be good. But as it gets along, it wants more and more, and you can never satisfy an eating disorder. And the reason I do that is to say that, your daughter or son, they can't fight this illness on their own at the moment. They believe what it's saying. So the role is for us to create a team that's going to stand up to this illness, because it's not your child's friend, but it's going to convince it otherwise. And I find that really empowering, of being able to actually help them go, okay, so my daughter's having a real absolute angry outburst because we're asking her to have some rice with her dinner. And they go, yep, what's the illness telling you? I had one patient call it Trump, which I thought was quite on the ball on that one. And, because you can never be very convincing, but you've got to be really careful and not believe what it says. But we won't go there. So just to finish off, I am finishing with a few quotes. While the journey seems long and hard at the beginning, with perseverance and dedication, the rewards at the end last a lifetime. That really resonates with me, because I work with a lot of patients with mental health issues. When I was learning, it was tough. And especially with my patients who suffered from eating disorders, I just kept going, am I doing the right thing? But over time, you start to see change. And a lot of patients with mental health conditions, that can take a while to get better, especially if they've had trauma. But if you hang in there and you get to know them and you keep giving them hope, and you're that solid person for them, it can really make a difference, and it can actually make our work a lot more enjoyable and rewarding. And don't ever forget, kindness can transform someone's dark moment with a blaze of light. You will never know how much your caring matters. Make a difference for another today. So I sort of ended on that, because I think when I started as a GP, I used to always go, oh, I didn't really help them. Like, I didn't fix them. I couldn't help this person feel better. But they'd come back and they'd be so appreciative, and they go, oh, I felt so much better after talking to you. And all I did was listen. And sometimes that's all we need to do, is just listen, create a safe space and a non-judgmental space, and it makes a difference.
Thank you so much. We have one question, which was and I know this session is not at all about medication and pharmaceuticals, but how do you manage a patient who has started on some antidepressants and they're still anxious and they're wanting something? Perhaps they're suffering from panic attacks. Would you like to comment on that at all?
Yep. Yeah. And it was interesting when because this was a pre-question, and I realized I didn't mention anything about questions about medication in this talk. And the reason is, it's not that I don't prescribe, but it's never my first line. And so I just didn't even think about talking about medication, but certainly happy to use that to answer that question. So I always warn my patients when I'm about to start them on an antidepressant, you need to be aware that it might make you worse before you get better. So the first 1 to 2 weeks, they can often feel quite anxious. And sometimes even telling them that, they go, oh, that's right, the doctor told me that. But for some people who are highly anxious and they're having panic symptoms, I would have no qualms giving them some Valium and say, look, this is just to get you started, and to give them, you know, maybe even 10 Valium or 5 Valium. And obviously if they've got suicidal risks, you need to involve the important other. But I would say, I want you to use this if you need, if you get really panicky, but this is just short term. And I think that's safe medicine. And generally, even if I do give that to my patients, the majority don't use it, but it's like a little safety tablet. Oh, that's right, I've got this in case I need it. I know that some people also use, there was a question about antipsychotics, and I don't know if this is still the case, but they used to use antipsychotics to augment SSRIs working. I don't really get into that. I think, you know, if we're getting to that point, I would normally be at least on the phone to a psychiatrist. But I really want to emphasize that a lot of the stuff I've taught today, you can, if you get them back, you know that they know you're there, and you give them some really simple supportive stuff, that often will be much better and more effective long-term than medication. But I hope that's answered that question.
So we've got a fantastic webinar on teaching your registrars about behavioural issues in children. What's normal when, you know, everyone has trouble with their children at some point, for sure. And a lot of people, GPs are in a great place to provide advice. So what can they say and what can they know? And we've also got a fantastic webinar coming up at the end of March on supervising the IMG, and that's by Simon Morgan, who's done some fantastic webinars for us. And stay tuned for a guide on this topic that will be hitting your practice fairly soon. It's supported by the AGPT program, so thank you, Australian Government. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. It is a very precious resource, and we hope that this has been very useful. But a big thank you to fabulous Susan, whose practical knowledge has just been so great. Any final comments, Susan, before we close this off?
No, I hope just my aim for today was really just to let all you GPs out there know that what we do is really good medicine. We do good relational medicine, and keep doing it. And we've got to really empower ourselves, because we can really help our patients, and we help them more than we realise. And I think often the registrars, you know, empower them to know what an amazing job being a GP is, because I'm certainly very proud. So thank you all for listening. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and good night.